So there have been peace talks between Russia and Ukraine taking place in Turkey. And what is interesting is how willing Zelensky has shown himself to be for a compromise, for a peace treaty. Now, this war between Russia and Ukraine has been going on for over a month now. You can say, well, it's been going on since 2014, but I'm talking about the actual conflict where it is directly Russian soldiers fighting Ukrainian forces and Ukrainian militias. And every single day we've been hearing about how the Ukrainians have been destroying Russian tanks, how they have been killing Russian soldiers. And we also have frequently heard this number coming out of the Ukrainian government that says that the Ukrainian military has slaughtered thousands of Russian soldiers. I think the number is 11,000 or so Russian soldiers killed by the Ukrainian military. And if you were to take all of this in, you would think that Russia is just getting its ass kicked and Russia is losing. Now, there is no doubt that the Ukrainians have been putting up a very, very tenacious fight. There is no doubt that the Russians have had significant difficulty in fighting the Ukrainians, especially in the realm of urban warfare. But at the same time, I think it is quite obvious that Ukraine could never really defeat Russia in a war, ultimately speaking, because Russia, at the end of the day, has the military technology to really adequately and sufficiently defeat Ukraine. And looking at how the media has presented all of this, you would get the impression that Ukraine is winning, or that Russia is just not doing as good as it wants to. But Zelensky is coming forward pretty willfully, pretty anxiously to have a compromise with Russia. This is not how someone who is winning a war acts or speaks. If Ukraine was really winning this war, it would say, well, we're going to hold off the Russians. We're going to wait. We can continue to fight. But Zelensky is coming out and saying, hey, Ukraine will remain a neutral country, just as Russia wants. Ukraine will not join NATO, just as Russia demands. And we can come to a compromise on the Donbass region. Well, the Donbass region is the region that Russia has been wanting since the beginning of the conflict that commenced in 2014. And that region consists of two governments. It consists of the republics of Luhansk and Donetsk. And these two republics are extremely pro-Russia, and they consist mainly of ethnic Russians who have been, for a very long time, resisting the Ukrainian government's attempts at Ukrainianizing that region. And that is really, if I had to make a guess as to what is Russia going to get at the end of this war, I would say that it's going to be the Donbass, because that area mainly consists of people who are pro-Russia. And the fact that Zelensky is saying that he is willing to have a compromise over the Donbass, and he has even said that the Russians should just rewind back to Donbass and we can begin our negotiations based on the whole controversy over Donbass. So the fact that Zelensky is willing to have a negotiation on Donbass, the fact that he has said that he is willing to have a compromise on Donbass, tells me that Ukraine isn't exactly winning this war. And it's interesting that Zelensky has said this because back in 2019, there was a German proposal made. It was called the Steinmeier formula. And the Steinmeier formula was supposedly a way to finally bring about peace and end the conflict in Donbass. And one thing about, or one aspect about the Steinmeier formula is that the two self-declared republics of Luhansk and Donetsk would be allowed to have autonomy, which means they would basically become Russian satellite states, autonomous Russian satellite states within Ukraine or bordering with Ukraine. And there has been talk about how this could just end up being another North and South Korea situation where, in this case, it would be this eastern Ukrainian region of Donbass being a Russian satellite state, or being a region having two Russian satellite states bordering with a pro-Western, pro-NATO country, Ukraine. And it's very interesting that this idea, the Steinmeier formula, was actually signed on to by Zelensky. Like, Zelensky actually agreed with the Steinmeier formula. He he put his signature on it. And that enraged people in Ukraine. In fact, after Zelensky signed the Steinmeier formula, there was a huge rally to protest this. And this rally had 15,000 Ukrainians. 15,000 Ukrainians gathered together to protest against Zelensky agreeing to the Steinmeier formula. So let's say, the fact that Zelensky, because there's been all this, it's been, I've had a long day. In a way, Zelensky has become this meme, right? He's become, and I've seen all sorts of cringy things online, like Zelensky is an alpha male, Putin is a loser. I've seen this. Putin is a loser. Putin is like a beta male, whatever, weakling. He has beta energy or something like that. Zelensky's an alpha male. He's a fighter. He's whatever, a warrior or something like that. And it's like, well, this guy is showing a lot of will and a lot of anxiousness for a compromise. And Zelensky himself said that if we don't end this war, it's going to lead to World War III. And in a way, I agree with him. Like, I don't really blame the guy for wanting a compromise. I don't. I mean, you're not going to beat Russia. Ukraine is not going to beat Russia. Recently, I saw a video. It was a little debate between Sean Hannity and Tulsi Gabbard. And, I always knew Hannity was cringe. And I always knew that he was a sycophant for the Republicans. But my goodness, this time I really saw him as just a complete maniac. He is. I mean, Hannity is a complete maniac. He says in this, because Tulsi Gabbard is like, listen, I don't think we should give the Ukrainians a false hope that they can actually defeat Russia. Because Hannity was sitting there trying to corner her, and he said, would you give Ukraine weapons? And Tulsi Gabbard stuck to her position and said, I don't want to give, she said, I think it would be cruel to give the Ukrainians false hope that they could actually defeat Russia. And she's right. She's right about that. I feel sorry for Ukrainian refugees, and I feel sorry for Ukrainian civilians who are going through the war, and I want this war to end. But Sean Hannity sits there and says, the president of the United States should send the message out that anyone who messes with us is going to be blown to smithereens. And it's like, what the hell does this have to do with the U.S. and Russia? Like, I mean, why even use that kind of language? The guy is a complete maniac, and I can see why it was necessary, or at least it was a good idea to have Alan Combs in that show, because Combs was really keeping a balance and keeping Hannity in check and forcing him to be balanced, or really forcing him to watch what he says, or to at least not sound like a complete maniac. But anyway, I digress. the the whole idea of Zelensky being like this warrior or whatever, it's like the guy knows that he's not going to win this war. He's not crazy enough to believe that he can actually defeat Russia or that Ukraine can actually defeat Russia. So I don't blame him for being swift in requesting a compromise with Russia or requesting some kind of peace treaty with Russia. But Russia is not going to leave this meeting empty-handed. And here's the thing is, when the Germans proposed the Steinmeier formula, Zelensky signed on to it. That's the thing. So it really wouldn't surprise me if Zelensky just gives up on the Donbass and tells the Russians that they can have it. It wouldn't surprise me, because even when Ukraine was not at war directly with Russia, Zelensky said, yeah, here, I'll sign on to the Steinmeier formula, which if put in operation, would allow Donetsk and Luhansk to become autonomous regions. And people were absolutely pissed off about that. And so if there's there's obviously talks going on. If it comes to the point where the Donbass is given to Russia, because I don't think Russia's going to leave this empty-handed. I don't think so. I just don't believe that. I don't think Russia would go out of its way to invade Ukraine and leave empty-handed. I think Russia is going to pressure concessions on Ukraine, and you already see a sign of that in the fact that Zelensky has said, let's have a compromise on Donbass. And it would not surprise me at all that Zelensky is just going to give up on Donbass, allow the Russians to have it in some way, be it through allowing those two self-declared republics to have autonomy, or just allowing them to be absorbed into Russia, or allowing there to be some kind of referendum in those two regions, those two self-declared republics, to have autonomy. But I think it wouldn't be surprising at all that Zelensky just gives up on it. And if that happens, watch the far right grow in Ukraine. They are going to be so angered by this, and watch a lot of Ukrainians turn on Zelensky. Would not surprise me at all if this type of thing happens. Now, even if there is a peace treaty or a ceasefire, that does not mean that fighting will not resume. Because look at how many ceasefires were agreed upon between the Ukrainian government and the pro-Russian fighters in Donbass. There were 29 ceasefires agreed upon from 2014 all the way to the summer of 2020, and all of them were violated. So even if there is a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, that does not mean that fighting will not commence again, and that fighting will not resume again. So I think that if there is a ceasefire, it's very likely that it's going to be temporary. Russia's going to get something out of it, and it's very likely, or it's very possible, that fighting will resume again. And in such a situation, Germany, which isn't that far away from Ukraine, is going to say, well, we have to get the military even bigger now. And other European militaries need to integrate themselves into the Bundeswehr, into the German armed forces. We need to have more integration. We need to have more of a pan-European military force. And you will see the rise of Germany. And I think that with the rise of Russia will also come the rise of Germany. I think that's inevitable. But yeah, it's the fact that Zelensky is anxious to have a compromise, Ukraine's not winning this war. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.